Hello and welcome to Good Evening Britain, a Force for Good's weekly show coming to you live from our studios here in the heart of the great British city of Glasgow, with me, your host, Alistair McConnachie, broadcasting on all our digital platforms throughout the United Kingdom and across the world. We're bringing you quality pro-UK comment and analysis every Wednesday from 7 until 8 p.m. on Facebook, on YouTube, on Twitter, and folks, we are on TikTok as well. Please do send in your comments, please send in your greetings, please tell us where you are watching from on this autumn evening, which is quite blustery and windy and in fact rainy here in our great British city of Glasgow this evening. Tell me what it's like where you are, wherever you are in the UK or across the world. And folks, this is our 75th episode of Good Evening Britain. Our 75th episode. We began this particular series called Good Evening Britain. We began it back, let me just check when we began it. We began it on the 12th of January 2022. And give or take one or two holidays and one or two breaks because of work, we have been broadcasting every week since then. And this is our 75th broadcast. And some of you have been with us since we began broadcasting, which was a way back in 2020. In fact, during 2020, we had 38 episodes of what we called our Saturday Street Stall. Did I say 28? I meant 38 episodes of our Saturday Street Stall, which was broadcasting at 1 p.m. every Saturday. And we started that just a couple of weeks after the infamous lockdown, because that was the best way that we could continue to get our message out, since we were prohibited from going on the streets, along with everybody else, of course. And then in 2021, we changed the format to Good Morning UK Have Your Say. And that ran from January 2021 until December 2021. And we had 46 episodes of that. And as I say, we changed the format going into 2022. And we've had this format ever since. And this particular year of 2023, we have made an effort to try to get new guests every week. And we don't have a guest tonight as it happens, so you've got me for the full hour. But folks, we've got plenty to talk about, plenty of craziness going on in the United Kingdom at the moment. What are your thoughts on what's been happening this week? Please do tell us. And always remember, folks, we are teleprompter free, okay? We are teleprompter free, so I'm riffing it for an hour, and that has to be worth something, right? That has to be worth something, to be able to talk for an hour on all of these matters in such a way. Please do send in your comments. Somebody on TikTok says, where is the accent from? Well, this isn't actually an accent, sir. This is just how words sound when they are pronounced properly. That's not actually my joke. I stole that joke from Jimmy Carr, but nevertheless, that's my standard response to people who ask where the accent is from. The accent is just a normal British accent, you know. You don't have to be accented in a particular way. Somebody says that I'm from Fort William. No, I'm not actually. I've lived in Glasgow for a large part of my adult life, but I suppose I can trace my ancestral roots to the Ayrshire coast, where both of my parents and sets of grandparents are from. And the Carrick and Cumnock Doon Valley, the Doon Valley especially, is where a lot of my ancestors are from. Why does Scotland get free prescriptions paid for by the English, says somebody on TikTok, ElectroKid100. It's a very good question, ElectroKid, and a lot of people have brought that up in the past and argued about it and suggested that really it's not a good idea. But that's just the way that devolution is. What devolution allowed was that the parties in charge would be able to use a budget however they wanted to do it. And in Scotland, the SNP, always out for the main chance, thought we'll use the budget to give people as many free things as possible. And the prescriptions are one of them. And some people think it's a good idea. Some people think that it's a waste of money because there's a lot of people who can pay for the prescriptions. They don't need to have them free. Certainly, if you need free prescriptions, you should get it. But what about those who can actually pay for it anyway? Isn't that just a waste of taxpayers' money? A lot of people would take that particular point of view. Now, let's just say hello to some people who have come in on Facebook and YouTube. Debbie's says, good evening, and as does Niall. Nice to see Niall, who is standing as the candidate for the Scottish Family Party at the Rutherglen and Hamilton West by-election, Westminster by-election, which is on the 5th of October. And he's, of all the candidates, he's the one that's got his head screwed on the best. No question about that. Christopher says, good evening to all Unionists from a steamy Falkirk kitchen. Fantastic. As TC also says, good evening. And Stuart up in Elgin. Niall says he'll be watching from his new Westminster office soon. Well, let's hope so, Niall. That would be good, because if anybody deserves £86,000 a year, it's certainly you. Before expenses as well. Ryan's phone calling in from a blustery Denby Dale in the West Riding of Yorkshire. And Christopher points out, in response perhaps to the chap on TikTok, one of the reasons is that social spending in Scotland is £2,000 higher for every man, woman and child, and it's all paid for by Westminster, which is to say the British taxpayer from all over the UK. Now, various crazy things happening this week. But before I do that, I just want to cast my mind back to when we did begin to broadcast in the year 2020. And back then, after we had all been locked down, I and the programme identified 5 issues that were facing the country while we were all stuck behind, imprisoned essentially in our houses. One of them was, of course, the lockdown and the politics of the lockdown and the legality of the lockdown and the righteousness or otherwise of doing such a thing, which had never been done in British history before. And we did not think it was a very good precedent whatsoever. And that, in a sense, is still with us, in the sense that it has developed into a kind of domination of the surveillance state, an expansion of the digital state, by which I mean everything being done online. The domination of the pharmaceutical industry, which has been getting particularly serious and reaching into all elements of politics. More about that in a minute. Especially through reaching into the funding of news dissemination sources in the first place, as well as political outfits. And also what came from the lockdown was just a general degradation of our public space, which is going to be the inevitable result of shutting people out of it. And that degradation is still to a large extent with us, and the shutting of people out of the public space continues in other ways also, with, for example, the ultra-low emissions zones which are being rolled out around the country. And in that regard, just read this week a very good article by Tom Harris, who says ULEZ ought to be the end of devolution. And that was published on that was published last month, 30th of August. But I got round to reading it today, and he makes such an important point. And the idea, of course, was with devolution was, what you'll do is you'll make government more responsive to the people if you devolve out to London, or to mayors in London, or to Scotland, or to Wales, or whatever. But to what extent is that really just nonsense and talk? And to what extent does it actually mirror the wishes of the people? And to what extent does it just give your mini dictators in these areas carte blanche to do whatever they want to do? Of course, it tends to be the latter. As he says here, does anyone really think the SNP in Scotland or Cairn in London have been significantly more responsive to the views of their voters than have the parties in Westminster? Have they been noticeably more willing to take responsibility for their failures, or have they instead chosen to shift the blame for them onto the British government? Of course they have, because that's the get out clause. That's what they're enabled to do. When things go wrong, they just say, well, we don't have enough powers to put things right, so it's not really our fault after all. And that is one of the worst things about devolution, is it enables the local politicians to ultimately avoid taking responsibility. It enables them to shift the blame onto the central state and thereby attack the central state in the eyes of the people. A very unfortunate thing, but which all of us knew was likely to be the case. Unless, of course, all the mayors and executives of the devolved areas are all supporting the main party that happens to be at Westminster. That's why devolution kind of worked during the early years when Labour were in power in London, and there was Labour in Wales and there was Labour in Scotland, and they could all agree. So it kind of worked in a way. But as soon as that broke up and you've got Labour in Wales versus Tories in London versus SNP in Scotland, an absolute recipe for chaos, versus Labour in London as well, of course. And so how can that ever be put right? Well, who knows? But Harris concludes here, when governments fail to rein in the excesses of the devolved authorities, they are letting power slip away, leading to a considerably less united kingdom. Absolutely. Right now, Britain does not have a strong international reputation for being particularly well run. In what way does the increasing number and powers of devolved mayors and the consequent rise in policy clashes and court battles help to restore its reputation? It's time to call a halt to the entire devolution experience before it further damages our country. Well, Tom Harris, we agree with you on that one. Let's just see if Rishi Sunak or Keir Starmer will call a halt to the entire devolutionary experience. Somehow, I think, unfortunately, they're not going to. They're likely only to make it worse. That's the reality we have to face. Somebody says there, what's beneficial reasons for the union? Now, we have an article, 52 reasons for the union. What we're going to do, sir, in response to that question is we're going to fire that out on our Twitter and our Facebook, in order that if you come across us there, you'll be able to educate yourself on that particular matter. Christopher says AFFG is delivering public education. Isn't it just? Well, let's deliver some public education right now. You know, I was reminded of this. What we're trying to do at A Force for Good is we are trying to create an online resource for the union. across all our digital platforms, so that you can already look back at all the stuff that we've got on our legacy site, on our website, on our Facebook, on our YouTube, where we've got hundreds of videos, on our Twitter, on our Instagram, where we've got hundreds, thousands indeed, posts, and on our TikTok, where we've got millions of views now, millions of views. We're creating an online resource for the union, and we're going to keep doing this so that in 10 years' time, and we have a plan of things that we're going to be writing in the next 10 years, 3 magazines a year, 1 book a year, and we're really going to be able to have created an amazing resource for the union. So we are educating people. We are absolutely educating people. And I was reminded of this when I looked at this article about... And this was another one of the things that we highlighted back in 2020. We highlighted 5 things. One of them was COVID, which I've touched on there. Another was the BLM revolution, which was going on, which was extremely bizarre all round. But it was clearly some kind of revolution that was occurring, mainly in the institutions that were all going behind this strange BLM ideology. Not really happening in real life in any extent, but certainly happening in the actual real institutions of the nation. And this lady wrote, and she, a black woman herself, wrote in the Daily Telegraph from the point of view of a teacher who wanted to deal with these matters, but not from the woke perspective. And she said, teachers are unequipped to address some of the complex subjects, including the legacy of empire, that children rightly want to learn about. And one of the problems is that when teachers look for resources on which to base their lesson plans, the only material which is readily available online is produced by Black Lives Matter style organisations. They can easily find PowerPoints and worksheets about the pervasiveness of white privilege. Yet there are very few websites to draw from that, and that provide a holistic view on the complexities of race. To the uninformed, quite radical views on race and empire can appear mainstream. And so what she was calling for in her article was essentially an online resource that dealt with the complexities in a way that wasn't a radical way intended to do down the country and its people itself. And I thought that's such a need. And here, from our particular work with the union, we need an online resource, and that's essentially what we are providing day in and day out, an online resource about the union, about unionist matters, and certainly about British history. And we coined the term British History Matters. And every day we publish something on our Facebook, our Instagram, and now also on our Substack, as well as on our Twitter, entitled British History Matters, which of course has that double meaning. So we are absolutely educating the public. And I was reminded of something as well last year, because this week there's been this story about a book has been released for children, talking about how black people have always been in Britain. And don't get me wrong, I think it's very important that we find ways in which huge numbers of people from abroad who are becoming British citizens can perhaps find a way into British history. And to the extent that people from abroad have played a role in British history, I think it is important to highlight that and to point it out. The important thing to do, of course, is not to do it in a foolish way, but to do it in a truthful way. Not to do it in an over-the-top way, which this book claims that Britain was black for 7,500 years before it became white. That's just craziness. And you think, well, who's going to believe that? Well, unfortunately, there are some people who will believe it. And I was reminded of a TikTok video which I saw last year, where this chap, who was, he wasn't entirely white, and he was saying that some of us, referring to himself, were slaves in Britain 50 years ago. And he was just a young bloke, he's maybe about 20. And he was saying that some of us were slaves in Britain 20 years ago. Well, 50 years ago, that's like 1973. Well, you know, he was only 20 years old, and maybe for him 50 years in the past was like such a period of time that was unimaginable, that it's just beyond his consciousness to imagine. But for those of us who have lived for 50 years and can tell him that's 1973, you know, we realise that, goodness me, if there are young people today who think there were slaves in Britain in 1973, then we do have a problem. You know, we do have a problem. So maybe this goes a lot deeper than we think. And just to be clear, slavery in England was declared illegal in 1772, which is to say 251 years ago. And slavery in Scotland was also pronounced illegal in 1777, which is to say 246 years ago. So that's considerably further back than 1973. Interestingly, the case in Scotland when slavery was proclaimed illegal was the case of a servant at the time. Well, his status was complicated, and that's why there was the court case. And his name was Joseph Knight, and his master, as they called it, wanted him back because he had said, well, I'm just leaving, okay. So the master took the so-called slave, Joseph Knight, to court to basically to find out what is his legal status. Is he able just to up and leave, or does he have some sort of requirement to stay under my supervision? And well, the court found that in fact slavery in Scotland was illegal, so yes, he could do what he wanted. However, what's interesting about the Joseph Knight case is the man who defended Joseph Knight, the man who defended the so-called slave, was Henry Dundas. Henry Dundas, the man that the SNP and the Greens and the politically correct crowd want to defame, the man whose statue in St Andrew's Square in Edinburgh they want to bring down. He was literally the man who defended the man who ultimately, whose court case made slavery declared illegal in Scotland. So again, shows you how much those folk know, which is basically absolutely nothing. So we're doing what we can. We're doing what we can to keep British history sensible and in the frame, because British history matters. Well, some of you will know of the iconic statue in Stirling on the field which is alleged to have been the Battle of Bannockburn field. I say alleged because people are not entirely sure where the battle was in relation to Stirling. They know it was somewhere in that area. Anyway, on the battlefield, as it's come to be known, there is this amazing statue of Robert the Bruce on a horse. There he is there. And the horse, I think, looks the part. Absolutely. You would not want to see that horse coming, looking at you like that for a start, and certainly not with Big Bruce there on top of it. Well, who sculpted that? Would you believe it was actually an Englishman who sculpted that? A man called Charles Dorville Pilkington Jackson, which is certainly a name and a half. And he passed away on this day, on the 20th of September, in 1973. In 1973, the year the fellow on TikTok thought there were still slaves in the United Kingdom. So he passed away on this day, 20th of September, 1973. And he was born in Cornwall, and he arrived in Scotland to attend the Edinburgh Institution, which is now called Stuart's Melville, and also to attend the Edinburgh College of Art in 1907, where he studied sculpture. And in World War I, he served in the Ayrshire Field Artillery in both Egypt and Palestine. And after World War I, Charles Dorville Pilkington Jackson received numerous commissions to design war memorials. And there's quite a few war memorials that this Englishman has designed throughout Scotland. And there's a real cracker in Ayr, outside the county buildings. Okay, and I remember this statue growing up, seeing it in Ayr. And let's put it up there. There it is there. That's to commemorate the men of the Royal Scots Fusiliers who gave their lives in World War II. And that stands in front of the county buildings in Ayr. And the inscription on it reads, "They died that we might remain free," which is certainly fine words indeed. And have we got other pictures of that statue? Let's see. There you go, that's a slightly closer one. It's a very, very lifelike statue. I remember seeing that when I was a wee boy growing up in Ayr and being fascinated by it. Took that picture 2 or 3 years ago when I visited it again. Okay, so by the time of World War II, Pilkington Jackson was too old for World War II, but he served in the gun operations room for coastal defence guns. And he created that statue of Robert the Bruce in Stirling in 1964 at the age of 76. So he was an old chap when he created that amazing statue, which has now, of course, become an iconic image of Scotland worldwide, created by the Englishman from Cornwall. And I think that's a wonderful example of the cross-cultural fertilisation that occurs naturally within a united Isles. And I always feel that if the Isles had not been united, that sort of natural cross-fertilisation where all parts of the United Kingdom are regarded as one's own country, regardless of whether you come from one part or the other, you're still in your country wherever you move to it. I think that's a fantastic thing about the UK, and one of the benefits of political union is that social seamlessness, which is ours if we want it. And he's buried in the cemetery in Lasswade. So that's Charles Dorville Pilkington Jackson on this day in British History Matters. And I was talking there about the seamlessness which can occur among the British when we like the idea, when we support the idea of political union, the social seamlessness that occurs. And we put an article up on our Substack yesterday. It was entitled Internal Boundaries of the UK Are Not Borders. And you can read that for free on our Substack. You'll find the link in the thread. We're putting all our articles on Substack for free for the first 2 weeks. And then after 2 weeks, they go behind a paywall. And anybody can get access to the paywall if they become a monthly donor at forceforgood.uk/union-supporters, along with other points. Let's get that banner scrolling along the bottom. There we go. forceforgood.uk/union-supporters. Become a monthly donor and you get access to our Substack paywall, as well as all the other things, as well as our new magazine, which will be in the office on Friday. Issue 9 of Union Heart. It's going to be called King and Country. It's a 16-pager and it's dedicated to Scotland and the monarchy. And you're going to find stuff in there that you wouldn't find in a lifetime of reading if you were waiting to just stumble upon it, because we've discovered things in there and little points of view, and we've brought them together in our concise, comprehensive and coherent manner to produce a really, really tremendous magazine. I'm very proud of this one. I'm very proud of all the magazines that we've done. Our graphic designer is an absolute whiz on what that person does, and I want to say thanks to them and also to everybody else for their patience. But we've finally got it done, and it will be in the office, and it will be going free to the union supporters who have already been getting the magazines. And if you're a union supporter and you want it, then, and you're not in the habit of getting our magazines, then just tell us and we'll add you to the list. But the union supporters are the way that we are funded. They are what keep us going day to day, because thankfully, we don't depend upon YouTube for finance. We don't depend upon TikTok or Twitter, which is just as well, I might add. We depend in the old-fashioned way of people hearing about us via our website or via our emails and becoming monthly donors. That's what keeps A Force for Good on the road. So as long as we can keep that program going, then we can stay here for the next 10 years, for the next 15, whatever it takes to keep doing it. As long as I've got breath and I've got the interest to read and write and organise, I can tell you that it will be a good investment. I can guarantee it will be an investment for you, because it will enable us to keep doing what we're doing. Talking of which, we're going to be busy this weekend and the weekend after as well with various things that are going on outside. So if you'd like to be part of what we do on the streets, you know what to do. Just contact us at contact@aforceforgood.uk. There it is on the screen, contact@aforceforgood.uk. If you want to help keep the British end up and you want to keep the fight going. So what else were we talking about 3 years ago when we started broadcasting? We were talking about the dangers of lockdown. We were talking about the politically correct revolution that was going on while we were all stuck behind our doors. There was a whole revolution going on in the Western world, which is still with us. We were talking about Brexit and the fact that it was not getting done. We were talking about the fact that we had left the EU largely on the 31st of January at 11 p.m. in 2020. And far from taking back control, the system took back control to actually deprive us all of our freedom about 6 weeks later. So that was an absolute catastrophic chaos. 2 years lost. 2 years Brexit lost. And it still hasn't been done properly. And it hasn't been done properly because the political class didn't want Brexit and didn't want to do anything about Brexit. So we're still kind of stuck in that. We were talking about the union, of course, and the issues facing the union, which we're still talking about. And the fifth thing that we were talking about was the immigration invasion, which had really started up, and we were beginning to notice it while we were all stuck and locked behind our front doors. The channel was being crossed daily by scores of small boats. The country was literally being invaded. And of course, that's only got even worse. And I read a really good article by Douglas Murray. Send illegal migrants to Islington. See how liberal opinion likes it then. And this is from the Telegraph of the 5th of September. And, well, the sending the illegal immigrants to Islington is perhaps a little bit of a comic point, because that's literally never going to happen. But I understand the point that he's making. He does, however, make a very important point, which I had not hitherto considered, and which is definitely worth reading out. He says, as I have long argued, I want to see the names of people in the Home Office who have allowed in, for instance, terrorists and other criminals who have gone on to cause terrible harm in this country. Just as people in the system are made to pay for scandals that obsess the left, such as the Windrush scandal, so it should also be the case that people in the system pay if they do things as a result of perceived virtue. Letting the Manchester Arena bomber's family into this country, for instance, or the Parsons Green bomber. I want names, firings, and where possible, prosecutions of public servants who cannot be bothered to enforce policy that would actually protect the public. But again, this government seems not to have the courage to do that any more than they have the courage to withdraw this country from the outdated and unworkable ECHR. Again, they seem to think that they can leave the problem for another day. Absolutely prosecute the civil servants who allow dangerous people to come into the country. If there was the threat of prosecution, then they're going to make sure that a lot of them do not come in. Because right now they're just being waved through, because there is no consequences for these public officials to do that. There has to be consequences, and these consequences have to involve public prosecution. So that's a very, very good point. And as a consequence of reading that, I came up with another point, which is that these Home Office people, the culture of the Home Office is such now that it's almost impossible to get them to do what they need to do. It's almost impossible to get them to do what needs to be done in order to get a grip on the massive numbers that are coming in. So maybe what that means is that whole Home Office department should simply be scrapped, and it should actually be outsourced to a new privately run corporation, a privately run firm, like a private security firm or something like that actually is tasked with doing something, gets paid money to do it, gets paid even more money if it reaches the targets that is required to do. Maybe that's actually where we're going now, is the British elements of the British civil service, especially the ones that deal with immigration, are so useless at it and so unwilling to do anything that they should really just be scrapped, and it should be given to private operators who are operating at, as they call it these days, at arm's length from the actual government of the day. How about that for an idea, okay? Yeah, so these are the things that are still with us. The lockdowns, COVID lockdowns, the Brexit, the union, immigration invasion, and the woke revolution. Now before, and of course we've got other things now, net zero and so-called climate change. That's been added on. And other things like banking power, the power of the banks just to continue to mess up. Everything has not been properly addressed. But let's put that aside. We've only got 10 minutes left. One thing I do want to get out there, though, is regarding the union. My attention was drawn to one of these interminable public think tank reports that's been written about the union by something called the Institute for Public Policy Research, IPPR. Now, whenever I hear names like that, and whenever I hear that they've written something about the union, I know it's not going to be a good thing for the union. It's not like they've decided, okay, we've got hundreds of thousands of pounds here to do a public survey. Let's do a public survey to see how well how we can keep the union together. No, you know they're going to do something that the intention is to undermine the union. Okay, and I call this activist sociology. They're activist sociologists. They take this fake science of sociology, and where you can make people think and say and believe anything, and then they craft their conclusions and they put it out there in an effort to politically undermine the union. And so it's called, the report, which I'm going to have to wade through, is called the ambivalent union. See what I mean, right? It's not like the fantastic union or the wonderful union or isn't the union great or 3 cheers for the red, white and blue union. No, it's the ambivalent union. What a bunch of you-know-whats. This is a family programme. Findings from the State of the Union survey by Ailsa Henderson and Richard Wynne Jones. So their big thing is that they're using this phrase called muscular unionism, which they do not define. But it's clearly meant to be a pejorative. It's clearly meant to be a bad thing. And they don't really give any examples of what it is, but it's whatever you do, don't be a muscular unionist. So I'll have more to report on this in time. But for now, the first thing I did was look up their funding, right? And this organisation, this Institute for Public Policy Research, in its annual report in 2021, it got £2,605,354 in donations from a variety of big corporations. £2,610,354, and what they do with it is they write reports to try to bugger up the union. You know, this is what we're up against, folks, right? Make no mistake about it. We are up against power, serious financial power. And I looked, and do you know who one of the biggest funders is? Wait for this, right? Drum roll. AstraZeneca. AstraZeneca gave the Institute for Public Policy Research £105,000 in 2021. And along with that, they also got £100,000 from BMS Pharmaceuticals. What on earth are AstraZeneca and BMS Pharmaceuticals giving over £200,000 to the Institute for Public Policy Research to write articles, to write reports, trying to damage the British Union? I'm going to calm down. I'm angry at that. I'm angry at that because, you know, a force for good. We're positively trying to keep the union together. We've got a great message. We've got a great attitude on all of these things. But AstraZeneca's not going to give us any money. And I wouldn't take it even if they did, by the way. But these companies who are selling products are funding these institutions in order, we have to presume, to come up with reports that will be favourable to their particular interests in some way. So that's what we're up against in the modern United Kingdom. So if you want to fight back against that, please do become a union supporter. TC says, well done, AFFG. It's so important to keep British history out there in the public domain, especially in these times of surrendering, knee-taking times. That's true, isn't it? Absolutely. Alan says, will the SNP now try and deviate from Rishi Sunak's new Green proposals in order to stir up hatred? Well, if they can find a way of being contrary, Alan, they certainly will do. That's for sure. Ken says he's going to look forward to the 200th show. Well, thank you, Ken. Thank you. People like you are what we rely upon. Thanks very much. Alan says, looking forward to the magazine, always full of great information. Great, absolutely. Well, it's going to be a good one. And then the next one will be probably December, January, and that'll be Busting Indie Myths Volume 2, because we had Busting Indie Myths Volume 1, and we're going to have Volume 2. It won't be called Busting Indie Myths, it will be called Indie Myths Busted. Busting Indie Myths Volume 2, that's what it will be called. Just beating their own country down. Absolutely, that's what these organisations are doing. Absolutely, that's all they're doing. So easy to destroy and to hate. It's much easier. It's much more difficult, it seems, to build up. Ryan says net zero equals net stupid, if you ask me. Well, we do ask you, and we do appreciate that response, because that is what it is. You know, Rishi Sunak sent out a tweet today, and I've got it here. I'll just put it up. Just talk about it briefly. We're stopping heavy-handed measures on net zero, and he's got some things there that he's going to do. He's not going to tax you if you fly. You won't have to sort your rubbish into 7 different bins. You won't have to compulsorily car share. You won't have to have expensive insulation upgrades. They won't be taxing on eating meat, thankfully. And he says this is a new approach to reach net zero. Well, we should be grateful for small mercies, but if you accept the premise of an argument, it's very difficult not to get drawn into it entirely, you know. And so people aren't wanting really a second brand of net zero. Oh, Keir Starmer's going to do it this way and Rishi Sunak's going to do it this way. No, people want something that's much more black and white. They want somebody to say what they're going to do for net zero, and they want somebody else to say net zero is a complete load of twaddle. Only that way can there really be action. Rishi Sunak's way, we're going to end up with all of these things anyway, based on a false premise. And it does feel like this mood of self-flagellating introspection at large across the UK. It needs to stop. I do blame the lockdown for that. Everything seemed to go downhill after that. Understandably so. Stuart likes another educational show. Folks, thanks very much. That's an hour's gone already. Goodness me. Teleprompter free as well, I might add. Teleprompter free. Now, folks, we will be back next week. Hopefully we'll have a guest next week as well. Until then, it just remains for me to say thank you very much for watching. Thank you for all the comments. We had a good wee chats, good wee comments coming in tonight. Stuart says, congrats, Chris, for the prize. Stephen agrees strongly with Ryan's well thought out points. We say congratulations to Chris, and he says thank you. And Alan says, great show as always. Good, folks. Now, we'll see you next week. Just remains for me to say God bless the United Kingdom and God save the King. See you next time.